Here's the story of Ananias and Sapphira. However, a man named Ananias, along with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property. With his wife's knowledge, he withheld some of the proceeds from the sale. He brought the rest and placed it in the care and under the authority of the apostles. Peter asked, Ananias, how is it that Satan has influenced you to lie to the Holy Spirit by withholding some of the proceeds from the sale of your land? Wasn't that property yours to keep? After you sold it, wasn't the money yours to do with whatever you wanted? What made you think of such a thing? You haven't lied to other people, but to God. When Ananias heard these words, he dropped dead. Everyone who heard this conversation was terrified. Some young men stood up, wrapped up his body, carried him out, and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife entered, but she didn't know what had happened to her husband. Peter asked her, Tell me, did you and your husband receive this price for the field? She responded, Yes, that's the amount. He replied, How could you scheme with each other to challenge the Lord's Spirit? Look, the feet of those who buried your husband are at the door. They will carry you out too. At that very moment, she dropped dead at his feet. When the young men entered and found her dead, they carried her out and buried her with her husband. Trepidation and dread seized the whole church and all who had heard what had happened. Now, this is a weird story. It's a weird story because it's so contradictory to the rest of our experience of God in the Bible. God's punishments are not usually this out of proportion. And truth be told, there's nowhere in the story where it tells us that God was the one punishing them. God is not the source of, we don't ever find out why they die, what causes their death. It's not explicitly told that to us that God is punishing them. But we've sort of interpreted that into the story. And so in the end, this story is not about punishment. And it's not even really about lying. It's not even really about Ananias and Sapphira hiding things from people. The story in the end is about the church and about commitment and about standards that we set that often are impossible for other people or for the church community itself to live up to. You see, the church is made of people. It's made of people, and people are made of all kinds of contradictory things. People are made up of all kinds of contradictory motives and opportunities and decision-making skills. And that creates problems. It does. It makes things difficult sometimes to navigate. See, Ananias and Sapphira were living up to a standard that nobody else set for them. There was no rule that said they had to sell their property and give it to the church or give the whole amount to the church. They could sell their property and give a little bit, or they could give a lot of it, or they could give nothing. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that they set a standard for themselves and then chose to lie about it, chose to not live up to their own standard. But the standard they set was impossible. No one was ever going to meet that bar. And so this story, in some ways, is about the ways that the church and the community of believers is about common life. It's about an identity. It's about who we choose to be together and how we choose to interact with one another when we are together. It's not about money or property or what classes we offer or any of those things. It's about the community. It's about the people who are here. And if we lose track of that, if we lose track of that priority, that purpose, then that's when we start causing trouble. We start causing harm to one another. It's when we start doing things like shaming people until they leave, right? The story insists that God's commitment to the church is absolute and gracious, even in spite of the fact that people and its members are not always good. But if we keep that in front of us, that we are God's community first, we will be blessed.